A half-bushel of corn stood on the platform scale in the Grange Hall at Quarry Bend, all through the meeting of the 20th of March, 1885, struck level with a stick, set out in the middle of the floor on purpose, so that every man who came in through the door could walk past it and read the beam for himself. The beam said 44 pounds. The law said 56. Loren Sisk did not say the corn was light. He stood up beside it with his thumbs in his vest and told about 130 people that a bushel went into the Diamond Creek mill and something a good deal less than a bushel came home again, and that a man did not need a scale to work out where the difference had gone. He let that sit a moment. Then he said the rest of it, gently, the way a man says a thing he has already said 100 times in a barn. You can see where the toll went. The hall laughed. Not all of it. Enough of it. Verna Hoyt did not cry. She did not leave, either. She did not look at the floor, and she did not look at the beam that was standing there, agreeing with her in front of the whole county. She stood up out of the third row, where every person in that hall could see her, and she stayed standing until the vote was called. If you have ever been in a room where everybody knows the answer except the one person who is right, stay with me. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button before we go on, and drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from, because I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let's go back to Chase County, Kansas, to Diamond Creek, and the fall of 1881, 4 years before that morning in the hall. That is where the word came from. The Diamond Creek Mill sat in a bend of the creek 9 miles east of Quarry Bend, in the low hills where the tall grass runs out onto limestone shelf. Verna's father built it. Anson Kirkbride hauled the first stone up from the Cottonwood Landing in 1868 on a stone boat behind 4 oxen, and it took him 11 days to move it 4 miles. It was a custom mill. That means it did not buy grain, and it did not sell flour. It ground what people brought, and it took its pay out of what they brought, which is the oldest arrangement in the world, and the one that has caused the most trouble. The pay was called toll. The law in Kansas said a miller could take 1/8 for corn, 1 sack in 8. Anson Kirkbride took it for 11 years, and nobody in the county ever said a word about it, because Anson Kirkbride was a big, loud man with a beard and a laugh, and because everybody's meal came home heavy. Verna was born in the mill house in 1855. She learned the trade the way you learn a language you are raised in. She was dressing stone at 14. That is the part of milling nobody outside a mill knows about, so let me tell you what it is, because it matters to everything that comes after. A millstone is not smooth. A millstone that is smooth will not cut. The face of it is carved with furrows that run out from the eye like the spokes of a broken wheel, and between the furrows the flat land is cut with hundreds of fine parallel lines. And the whole pattern has to be sharp, or the meal comes out crushed instead of cut. It goes dull. It always goes dull. So every so often you shut the mill down, you hoist the top stone over on its bale, you lay it face up, and you go at it with a mill pick for 2 days on your knees. It is the hardest handwork in any trade on the frontier. Her father said that. He also said it was the only work he had ever seen where being heavy was an advantage. And he said it to her the first time she picked up the pick, at 14, when she was already broader through the shoulders than her mother. You have got the weight to hold a pick still, he told her. Most men fight the pick. You can just be heavy at it. She never forgot that he said it like a compliment, because for the next 20 years she did not hear it said that way again. Anson Kirkbride died in the winter of 1879. Verna was 23, and she had already been running the mill for 2 seasons, while he sat in a chair by the hopper and told her things she knew. She married Hoyt in the spring of 1880. Dell was a good-natured man out of Missouri who could mend anything with a belt on it and who never in his life dressed a stone. His name went on the license and on the sign because that was how the county liked it and because it saved an argument. Everybody in Chase County knew whose hands ran the Diamond Creek Mill. They did not mind knowing it. Not yet. Then came 1881, and the corn came in light. Here is the whole trouble of this story, and it is not complicated, and it took 4 years and a great deal of damage before one man in that county would say it out loud. A bushel is not a weight. A bushel is a space. It is a hair over 2,150 cubic inches of room, and you fill the room and strike it level with a stick, and whatever is in the room is a bushel. That is fine as long as the corn is the same corn every year. Corn is not the same corn every year. Sound Kansas corn, dry, full in the kernel, weighs 56 pounds to the bushel, and the law says so. But 1879 was dry in July, and 1880 was drier. And 1881 the chinch bugs came up out of the grass in the second week of June and went down the rows like a gray stain. The ears came in short and the kernels came in shrunken, thin at the tip, loose on the cob. Corn like that rattles. Corn like that fills a half-bushel measure with as much air as it does corn. The same measure. Less corn. Verna waited in September of 1881 because she was curious and because her father had taught her never to argue with a mill, only with an arithmetic. A struck bushel of the county's corn that fall weighed 48 pounds. Some of it weighed 46. Loren Sisk's corn off the flat ground east of town weighed 44 pounds and 8 ounces, and Loren Sisk grew more corn than any other man in Chase County. She wrote it all in the daybook. Then she made her mistake, and I want you to understand that it was a mistake, and that it was the right thing to do, and that both of those are true at once. She told them. It was the second Saturday in October. There were maybe 30 men in and around the mill door, with wagons backed up along the creek road. And Milo Pruitt had just carried out his sacks and stood in the yard weighing them with his eyes the way a man does. That is short, Milo said. It is short, Verna said. Come here and I will show you why. She had the platform scale in the doorway where the light was good. She set the half-bushel measure on it and filled it out of Milo's own wagon and struck it level with the stick and stood back so he could read the beam himself. 46, she said. It ought to be 56. You did not bring me a bushel, Milo. You brought me about 8/10 of one, and you brought it 3 times, and you are going home with 8/10 of what you got in 1878. Milo Pruitt looked at the beam for a long time. So the corn is bad, he said. The corn is light, she said. It is not the same thing. It will feed. There is just less of it in a wagon than there used to be, and that would have been the end of it, and there would be no story, except that Loren Sisk had come up the creek road behind the wagons and had been standing in the yard for the last 2 minutes with his hands behind his back. Sisk was 47 that year. He had 1,100 acres of bottom ground, a seat on the Grange, an interest in the bank at Quarry Bend, and the loudest ordinary voice in the county. He was not a cruel man in the way people mean when they say cruel. He was worse than that. He was a man who was never once uncertain. Verna, he said, you are standing there telling this county that its corn has got smaller. I am telling it what the scale says. And what does the scale say about the toll? The toll is 1/8, she said. It has been 1/8 since 1868. 1/8 of what, though? He said it pleasantly. He said it to the yard, not to her. That is the question, is it not? 1/8 of what a man brings, measured by a woman, in a building nobody else can get into, out of a chest nobody else looks in. He smiled at the men. I am not saying a word against anybody. I am only saying that a man brings a load of corn up this creek and goes home lighter every year, and the corn has not got any smaller in my crib. Somebody laughed. Not because it was funny. Because he was Loren Sisk, and because it is easier. Verna set the stick down on the platform. Then bring your crib, she said. Bring a wagon of it. I will weigh it in front of all of you. I am sure you will, Sisk said. And then he said the thing. He did not shout it. That is what people always get wrong when they tell this part, and the men who were in the yard that day would tell it for the rest of their lives with the volume put back in. Because it made them feel better about laughing. He said it quietly, half over his shoulder, walking away toward his horse, the way you make a remark about weather. You can see where the toll went. The yard laughed. Verna Hoyt stood in her own doorway, with a half-bushel measure in both hands, and 30 men laughing in front of her. And she did not cry, and she did not answer. And she did not put the measure down. She finished the weighing. She ground Milo Pruitt's corn. She took 1/8 of it. Because that is what the law allowed, and because taking less that day would have been an admission. And she carried the sacks out to his wagon herself, 2 at a time, the way she had done since she was 16. It was 7 words. It went across Chase County in about 11 days. 7 words. In a doorway. On a Saturday afternoon. Half over his shoulder. Not shouted. Not even meant much. Nobody wrote them down. Nobody had to. You have to understand what a thing like that does in a small county. It does not stay a remark. It becomes a shorthand. A man does not have to say anything unkind ever again. He only has to say the toll, and everybody knows the rest. And everybody gets to be pleasant while they say it. By Christmas of 1881, they were not calling her Verna at the store. They had a word. Greedy, not shouted. Never shouted. Said in the tone you use for a well-known fact about somebody. Said with a little shake of the head. Said by people who would have told you honestly that they had nothing against the woman. She heard it the first time from a boy of 19 who worked at the lumber yard and who did not know she was behind him. She heard it the second time from a woman she had gone to school with. The third time she heard it from Dell, in her own kitchen. Because he thought she ought to know what was being said in town, and because he was a kind man and did not know that repeating a thing puts it in a house. They do not mean anything by it, Dell said. I know what they mean by it, Verna said. She did not say anything else about it that night, and she did not say anything else about it for 4 years. But something changed in the mill that winter, and nobody in Chase County knew it had changed, and it is the axle this whole story turns on, so hold on to it. She stopped tolling by measure. Understand what that means. The old way, her father's way, the legal way, is that you take your 1/8 off the top, out of the measure, before you grind. You dip the toll dish into the hopper. 8 dishes for the man, 1 for the mill. It is quick and it is honest, and the law wrote it that way. The new way, her way, from January of 1882, she ground the whole load first. All of it. Then she weighed the meal that came out of it, on the platform scale, in front of whoever was standing there, and she took 1/8 of that. It sounds like the same thing. It is not the same thing, and the difference is the entire county's grievance sitting in her lap. Because when the corn is light, the loss is already in the wagon. The air came in with it. If she told the measure, she took a full 1/8 of a wagon that was already 8/10 of a wagon, and the man's share was short twice, and the toll would look enormous against what he carried home. If she told the meal, she carried the light corn herself. Every pound of air in that man's load came off her 1/8 and not off his. It was less pay. Every single load, for 4 years, it was less pay. She never told one living person she had done it. Not Dell. Not the bank. Not one of the 90-some men who hauled corn up Diamond Creek in a season and stood in her doorway and watched her weigh a sack and thought, if they thought anything at all, that the woman was slow about it. She wrote both numbers in the daybook, though. That was her father in her. Anson Kirkbride wrote down everything, and his daughter wrote down everything. And in the ruled book on the shelf above the flower chest there were 2 columns on every page from January of 1882 onward. The left column was what the law allowed her. The right column was what she took. They were never the same number again. She did not add them up. Not for a long time. There is a kind of arithmetic a person avoids the way you avoid a sore tooth with your tongue, and then do it anyway, and she avoided that one for 3.5 years. And when she finally did it, at a lamp, in August, it very nearly finished her. We will get to that. Del Hoyt took a fever in the last week of December 1882, and he died on the 9th of January 1883. And he was 34 years old. It was quick and it was ordinary, and half the families on the creek had one that winter. Verna buried him on the ridge above the dam next to her father, and 11 days later she rode into Quarry Bend and had her own name put on the miller's bond at the courthouse. V. Hoyt, Miller, Diamond Creek, 27 years old. A widow of 11 days, a stone mill, a rebuilt dam, 2 4-foot burrs, her father's daybook, her own name on a bond, and a word. And here's a thing that is going to sound small and is not small at all. The toll did not change, not by an ounce. It had been 1/8 for 15 years, and it stayed 1/8. And in point of fact by then, she was taking less than 1/8, and nobody knew it. But the counting started. Nobody in Chase County had ever counted the toll at the Diamond Creek Mill while a man's name was on the sign. In February of 1883 men began, quietly, in their own barns, with a pencil on a board, counting what they brought and counting what came home, and telling each other the answer. And every one of those answers was true. That is the thing that made it unanswerable. They were not lying about her. They were measuring their own bad corn with a stick and putting a woman's name on the result. Verna Hoyt was 27 years old, a widow of 11 days, alone in a stone mill on a creek, with a word attached to her that she could have disproved in about 4 minutes with a scale. Nobody was ever going to look at the scale. That is not the sad part of this story. That is only the beginning of it. The mill ran on water. That is worth a minute, because the water is going to matter. Diamond Creek is not a big creek. It is a limestone creek. It runs clear and cold, and it runs all year in a bad year, which most Kansas creeks do not. And Anson Kirkbride picked the bend for that reason, and for one other. There is a ledge across it. He built his dam on the ledge in 1868 and put in a breast wheel 16 feet across. And the wheel drove a pair of 4-foot burrs on the ground floor and a bolting reel up in the loft. The dam was the only thing in the county that ever frightened Verna Hoyt. Stone dams move. Water gets under them. In the spring of 1884, the creek came up 9 feet in a night, and when it went down there was a scour hole under the apron the size of a wagon box. She hired 2 men and a team and worked 41 days beside them and rebuilt the toe of it in laid limestone. It cost $412. She had $137. She borrowed the rest at the bank in Quarry Bend, and the note came to $275, and it was written for 3 years, and it fell due on the 1st of March, 1887. Hold on to that. $275 was not a large sum in Chase County. Loren Sisk carried more than that in his pocketbook at the fall sale. But $275 was the whole of the difference between a wheel that turned in April and a man from Emporia driving out with a stone boat to take the burrs. That is what a small note is on a small place. It is not money. It is the hinge the door hangs on. Now, the 4 years. I could tell you they were quiet. They were not quiet. They were loud in the way a slow leak is loud once you have heard it. She ground for the creek families, and she ground for the outfits. In a good week, 300 bushels. She sharpened the stones every 6 weeks, on her knees 2 days at a time, alone. She kept the daybook. She kept the 2 columns. She read the beam out loud to every man who stood in her door, whether he wanted it or not. Because her father had said a miller who does not say the number out loud is only waiting to be accused. And they said the word anyway. It got easier for them, not harder. That is how it works. In 1882, a man had to lower his voice. By 1884, nobody bothered. Ora Ledbetter's wife said it across the counter at the store, with Verna standing at the flour barrel 8 feet away, and then turned around and said good morning to her, pleasantly, and meant the good morning. She did not answer it. Not once in 4 years. You are going to want her to. I wanted her to. But there is a thing that happens to a person who has been right in public one time and been laughed at for it, and I do not think there is any way to explain it, except that being right had already cost her everything it was ever going to buy. So she stopped spending it. She spent her hands instead. 6 days a week. 14 hours in some of them. 2 days on the stones. No help. No partner. No wage but the toll. No complaint to anybody. And no answer, not once. If you have made it this far into Verna Hoyt's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Now let me bring you the other one. The one this story ends on. Emmett Dow ran the Longspur. The Longspur lay north and east of the mill, 11,000 acres of Flint Hills bluestem, between 2 limestone breaks, and it wintered about 9,900 head of cattle and kept 90 horses. Dow was 36 in 1885. He had come up from Texas as a boy with somebody else's herd and stayed because of the grass. And he had bought the first section of the Longspur off a bankrupt in 1874, with money he had saved $1 at a time. He was lean and weathered, and he wore a broad felt hat and a leather vest, and he was not a talker. He was, however, a man with a book. That is the thing you have to know about Emmett Dow, and it is not a flattering thing, and it is why this story hurts in the middle. He kept the best set of books of any outfit in Chase County. He weighed, he measured, he wrote down what a thing cost him and what it returned, and he did not decide anything by feeling, and he was proud of that, and he had a right to be. Men came to him for advice about paper. He ground about 2,200 bushels a year at Diamond Creek, corn for the horses and cracked feed for the winter cows. He was the mill's biggest single account, and he had been since Anson Kirkbride's time, and he paid his toll without a word. He had never once said the word about her. He had also never once said anything against it. Now let me take you back into that hall. The 20th of March, 1885. Snow still in the shaded fence corners, mud in the street. 130 people packed into the Grange Hall at Quarry Bend with their coats on, because the stove was no good. There was a proposal on the floor. Loren Sisk had brought it. Chase County was to build itself a mill, not a water mill, a steam mill, on the lot behind the lumber yard in Quarry Bend, with a portable engine and a pair of French burrs freighted in from Kansas City. The subscription was $3,400 in shares of $50. Sisk had already put himself down for $600. And the whole of the argument for it, the whole thing, was the half-bushel on the scale in the middle of the floor. There it is, Sisk said. Every man walked past it. They walked past it. That is a bushel of Chase County corn, Sisk said, measured legal, struck level. And there is not one of you here can tell me what a bushel of your corn weighs, because you have never once been told. That was true. It was completely true. It was, in fact, the truest sentence spoken in that hall in 10 years, and he was about to use it backward. 44 pounds, Sisk said. Now, what I want to know is why it takes 9 miles of creek road and a woman with a chest full of somebody else's meal for a man in this county to find out a number like that. Verna Hoyt was in the third row. She had known the exhibit was coming. Dosia Pruitt had told her at the store on the Thursday, kindly, the way people tell you a thing so they can watch your face. She had come anyway. She had put on her good dress, the deep green wool. And she had walked in and sat down in the third row where the light from the south window fell. And she had not spoken to anybody, and nobody had spoken to her. And when Sisk pointed at the scale, she nearly stood up. I want to be honest with you about that moment, because everything after it turns on it. She had it. She had the whole thing in her hands. 4 years of weights in a ruled book on a shelf 9 miles away, 44 pounds standing on a beam in the middle of the floor, and a room full of men who had just been told, by Loren Sisk himself, that not one of them knew what their corn weighed. All she had to do was say, then weigh it. She did not say it. She had said it in 1881. She had said it in her own doorway, with the scale under her hand and a man's own corn on the beam, and 30 men had laughed, and the word had come out of that laugh, and it had lived on her for 4 years. So she sat. And Loren Sisk, with his thumbs in his vest, said the thing about the toll, and the hall laughed, and Verna Hoyt stood up. Not to speak. She wanted to be seen. That was all of it. She stood up in the third row in the green dress, with her hands at her sides, and she looked at the men who were laughing until they were finished laughing, one at a time. And it took a while, and it got very quiet before it was over. Then somebody at the back called for the question. The vote was 84 for and 31 against. 84 hands. She counted them. It took a while. She knew nearly every name. She had ground for most. She had carried sacks for some. She had gone to their funerals. She did not look away. Emmett Dow voted for it. She saw him do it. He was standing at the end of the 6th row, with his hat in his hand, and when the A's were called, he put his hand up like a man signing a receipt, without heat, without looking at her, and put it down again. That is the part she took home. Not Sisk. Sisk was weather. Sisk had been saying that kind of thing since she was a girl, and would be saying it in the ground. But Emmett Dow had hauled corn up Diamond Creek for 11 years, and had watched her weigh out his meal on the platform scale 200 times, and had never once had a short sack. And he raised his hand. He came out to the mill 3 weeks later, the 9th of April, a Thursday, bright and windy. She heard the horse and knew the horse. He did not get down at first. He sat there in the yard looking at the dam and the head race and the sluice gate and at the 2 big grinding stones her father had worn out standing on end against the wall of the mill house like a pair of gravestones. Then he stepped off and dropped the rein and came to the door. "Mrs. Hoyt, Mrs. Dow, I have come to tell you myself," he said, instead of you hearing it. "All right." He had a folded paper in his coat. Of course he did. "I have got 11 years of what I hauled you and what I hauled home," he said. "I have been at it 2 nights. I want you to understand, I am not saying one word about your honesty. Say the number. In 1874 I hauled you 2,100 bushels, and I took home 1,715 sacks weight in meal and bran. In 1884 I hauled you 2,240 bushels, and I took home 1,402. He looked at the paper, although he clearly did not need to. That is 313 short on a bigger load. That is 11 tons of feed over 11 years that went somewhere, and I cannot make it come out." "No," she said, "you cannot. So I am going to grind in town when the mill opens. It is 4 cents the bushel. Cash, no toll. I make it saves the Longspur $60 a year, and I do not have to keep a book on a friend." He said the word friend. She noticed it. She thought about it for a long time afterward. Mr. Dow, she said, will you come inside 2 minutes? I would rather not. It is 2 minutes. Mrs. Hoyt, he was not unkind. That is the whole trouble with the man. He was never once unkind. If I come in there, you are going to show me something, and I am going to want to believe it, and then I am going to go home to a book that says different. I would as soon keep the respect. You would as soon not have to change your mind. That is likely fair. Then I will say it out here, she said, and you can carry it home in your pocket and look at it or not. Bring me a wagon of your own corn. Any wagon. I will not touch it. You strike it level yourself, and you put it on my platform scale yourself, and you read the beam yourself. If it says 56 pounds, I will grind the long spur free for a year. Emmett Dow stood in the yard with his hat in his hand. What has the weight got to do with the toll? He said. And there it is. That is the sentence. If you take nothing else out of this story, take that sentence, because a good man said it, in good faith, in broad daylight, holding a page of correct arithmetic, and it was the exact question, and he did not know he had asked it. Everything, Verna said. It has got everything to do with it. I do not follow you. I know you do not. Then tell me plain. And she opened her mouth to tell him plain, and what came into her head, whole, was the yard in October of 1881 with 30 men in it laughing, and the 7 words, and the 4 years. Bring the wagon, she said. That is plain. I have not got time to play at a thing, Mrs. Hoyt. No, she said. Nobody ever has. He put his hat on. He said he was sorry. He meant it, which was worse. He got up on the horse and rode down the creek road. And Verna Hoyt stood in her doorway and watched him go, and then went inside and ground 40 bushels for Neva Cundiff and read the beam out loud to Neva Cundiff, who was not listening. The Longspur's account was 31% of the mill's year. She wrote it in the daybook that night, in the left-hand column and the right-hand column both. And under it she wrote one line that was not a number, which was the only time in 4 years she wrote anything in that book that was not a number. He asked what the weight had to do with the toll. Then she shut the book and went to bed and got up at 4 and dressed the North Stone. The Chase County Milling Company opened on the 6th of June, 1885. They did it on a Saturday, so there would be a crowd. There was a crowd. Half the county came in. And the lumber yard put out a barrel of lemonade. And Hosea Fite read the subscription list aloud from the loading dock with all 71 names on it. And Loren Sisk cut a ribbon of binder twine with a pocket knife because nobody had thought to bring scissors. The engine was a portable, 12-horse, hauled out from Kansas City on 2 cars. The burrs were French. That is a real thing, and it is a good thing. French burr stones are built up out of blocks of freshwater quartz banded with iron hoops, and a good pair will outgrind granite 3 to 1, and they had cost the county $640 delivered. The sign was painted on the gable end in letters 2 feet high. No toll. Cash grinding. 4 cents the bushel. Verna Hoyt did not go in. She was in town that day. She had to be. It was the first Saturday, and she bought her month's coffee and salt on the first Saturday, and had for 6 years. She stood across the street outside Gedney's store with her basket on her arm, and she watched them cut the twine. Almond Gedney came out and stood beside her in the door. You could go over, he said. I could. They would not say anything to you. No, Verna said. They would not say anything to me. She bought her coffee and her salt and drove home. Now I am going to tell you what happened to the Diamond Creek Mill in the following 6 weeks, and I want you to hear the numbers the way she heard them, which is 1 at a time, in a quiet building, with a wheel that is not turning. Week 1, she ground for 2 customers. Week 2, 1. Week 3, none at all. Week 4, Neva Cundiff came up with 9 bushels in a handcart, which was not enough corn to be worth the water it took to grind it, and both of them knew that. And neither of them said it. 6 weeks. 3 days of grinding. In 1884, she had ground 31 days in the same 6 weeks. It was not a boycott. That is important. Nobody organized anything. A boycott would have been something to push against, and there was nothing to push against. It was 4 cents a bushel, cash, in a town where a man was going anyway, against 9 miles of creek road, and a toll he had been told for 4 years was a robbery. Every single man made a sensible decision on his own, and the sum of 90 sensible decisions was a stone building on a creek with a wheel standing still in the water. The wheel is the sound. She told somebody that, years later. You live over a wheel for 30 years, you do not hear it. You hear it when it stops. So she went out and worked. Here is what saved her that summer, and it is the trade her father gave her at 14. There were 9 watermills within a day and a half of Diamond Creek, and every one of them had stones, and stones go dull, and there were maybe 4 men in that end of Kansas who could properly dress a pair of burrs. She could. She was better at it than any of them, and they all knew it. And that is a thing men will admit privately about a woman when the alternative is meal that will not sift. She got $3 a day and her keep. In July of 1885, she dressed stone at Halloran on the Cottonwood, and at a mill on Fox Creek, and at a mill in Morris County she had to stay 4 nights at. She slept in a loft over a hopper with mice in it. She came home on the 19th of July with $27 and a hand she could not close all the way. She dressed her own stones on the 20th. That is not a figure of speech. She came off 4 days of another man's burrs, drove 9 miles, slept, and got up and hoisted her own runner stone on the bale, and laid it over and went at it. Because a mill with nothing to grind still has to be ready to grind. And because she was not going to be caught dull on the day somebody came back. Nobody came back. Not in June. Not in July. Not one wagon. Not one sack. The road stayed empty. The water went over the dam. The wheels stood in it. The building did nothing at all. Let me tell you about the weighmaster. On the 4th of August, 3 men drove out to the mill. Hosea Fite, who was the Grange secretary and a decent enough man. Byram Tate, who was the banker at Quarry Bend and who held her note. And Loren Sisk. They came in the afternoon. They did not get down for a minute, the way men do when they have talked it over on the road and nobody wants to start. Verna came out. She had her apron on and her sleeves rolled, and she had been picking a stone since 6 that morning. And there was gray grit in her hair, and a bright bead of blood dried on the back of her left hand, where a splinter of steel had come off the pick. Mrs. Hoyt, Fite said. Mrs. Fite, we have got a proposition, and I want to say first off it is meant kindly. All right. The county is going to want a weighmaster, Fite said. Public scale, on the lot by the depot. Grain, hay, stock, somebody honest to stand at it and read the beam and write the ticket. There is a salary. It would be $40 the month. Verna stood in the yard and looked at the 3 of them. Whose idea was it? She said. It was mine, said Sisk. I thought so. Now, Verna, he put a hand up. He was smiling. He was always pleasant. There is no call to take it that way. You know scales. Everybody in this county will tell you the woman knows a scale. And it would put a wage in your hand, regular, which milling is not going to do you any more, and there would be no hard feeling anywhere. No hard feeling, she said. None, because there would be nothing left to have hard feeling about. Because you would be in the town, Sisk said, where a person can see the work. There it was. He had not even meant it as a knife. That was Loren Sisk entire. He handed you the exact shape of the thing and did not know he was holding it. Verna looked at Byram Tate. "And my note," she said. Tate cleared his throat. The bank would look favorably at a salaried applicant. Mrs. Hoyt, very favorably. I would not want to promise, but I would not want you to worry either. So the $275 goes away. I would say it becomes a great deal easier. It goes away, she said, if I shut the mill. Nobody answered that. She wiped her hands on the apron. She was thinking about it. I want to be honest with you, because a story where a woman is never tempted is a story about a fence post. She was 30 years old. She had ground 3 days in 6 weeks. Her hand would not close. And 3 men had just driven 9 miles to offer her $40 a month and the end of the only debt she had. "Mr. Fight," she said, "you do not need a weighmaster." "Well now, the Grange has thought about it a good. You have got a scale," Verna said. "There is one on the platform at the depot, and there is one in my doorway, and there has been one in my doorway since 1868. You do not need another scale, and you do not need a woman standing at it. You need one man in this county to walk up to a scale that is already there and read what it says." "That is a hard way to put it," Fight said. "It is 44 pounds, she said. "That is how it is put. Your bushel is 44 pounds, and the law says 56, and there is not a man of you will look at it, and you have built a mill in town for $3. $400 to keep from looking at it, and now you would like to pay me $40 a month to stand somewhere else." Sisk laughed. Not cruelly. He honestly thought she was making a joke about herself. "Verna," he said, "the corn is the corn." "Yes," she said. "That is exactly right. That is the only true thing you have said in 4 years." They drove home. She stood in the yard. She watched them go. Then she went inside. Then she picked up the pick. $40 a month. She had thought about it. She thought about it that night. Then, never again. That was the first time somebody offered to take the weight off her. And it will not be the last, and I want you counting them, because how a person refuses tells you more than how they endure. August of 1885 was hot, and there was no rain in it after the 11th. The wheel did not turn between the 6th and the 22nd. She had the mill scrubbed. There was nothing else to do with the days. She swept the loft and oiled the bolting reel, and greased the gudgeons, and packed the sluice gate, and painted the head race markers. And then one afternoon she carried both grinding stones worth of tools out into the yard, and cleaned and set every mill pick she owned, all 22 of them, and laid them out on a board in a row from heaviest to lightest, and sat and looked at them. That is the kind of thing a person does when they are about to do a thing they have been avoiding. She went in at dark and lit the lamp and got the daybook down off the shelf above the flower chest. Now, 3.5 years of pages. 2 columns on every one. The left column, what the law allowed her, which is the toll she could have taken out of the measure like her father and every miller in Kansas. The right column, what she actually took. Weighed out of the finished meal in front of the man it belonged to. She had never added them. She got a slate and a pencil, and she started on the 4th of January 1882, and she worked forward, load by load, week by week, and it took her until after 2 in the morning, and she did it twice because the first time she did not believe it. The difference was 6,320 pounds of cornmeal. At the 4-year average price, it came to $104. She sat at that table with the slate in front of her, and the lamp burning down, and the creek going over the dam outside in the dark. And she did the last piece of arithmetic, which took no time at all. Her note was $275. She had given away 4 times her note. Not lost it. Not been cheated of it. Given it. Handed it out, a few pounds at a time, over 3.5 years, to men who had walked out of her door and driven home and told each other in their own barns, with a pencil on a board, what the greedy woman at Diamond Creek had taken off them. She did not weep at that table. I have thought about why, and I think it is this. There was nobody to be angry at. Not one man in Chase County had ever asked her to carry the light corn. She had done it herself, in the dark, on purpose, for 4 years. And she had done it because in October of 1881, 30 men had laughed at her in her own doorway. And she had decided, without ever putting it in words, that she was never going to be short with anybody ever again as long as she lived. She had made herself unaccusable. And it had not worked, because the accusation was never about the toll. She sat there a long while. Then she wrote the number at the bottom of the page, $104, and she looked at it, and underneath it she wrote the sentence that she could never say to another living person in that county. And it was 5 words. And here they are. I have been carrying you. You see why she could not say it. Think about what that sentence does in a small place. It does not clear her. It convicts every man who hears it. It says, for 4 years you have been going home with meal that was mine, while you called me a thief in your barn, and I let you, and I knew, and I wrote it down. There is no room in a county that size for 100 men to hear that and go on nodding to a woman at the store. They would not forgive it, not one of them. Being carried is the one thing pride will not survive. So the number stayed in the book. She put the book back on the shelf above the flower chest, and she blew the lamp out. And in the morning she got up at 4 and went out and looked at the sky. Because something had changed in it in the night, and she had been reading that sky off a limestone ledge since she was 6 years old. It had gone soft and low and gray in the northwest. The rain came on the 24th of August, 1885, and it was the first of it. And it did not stop properly again until the 2nd week of November. You have to understand what a wet fall does to corn. Corn does not come off the stalk ready. It comes off wet. In a normal Kansas October, the ear stands out in the field in the wind, and the sun and dries down on its own, and by the time a man snaps it and throws it in the wagon it is hard, and he cribs it and it keeps. That is a dry fall. It is most falls. 1885 was not most falls. It rained on the 24th of August, and it rained on the 27th, and it rained 9 days in September. The creek came up twice. The bottom ground stayed soft. Then the middle of October went still and gray and warm, day after day, no wind at all, with the fog lying in the draws until 10 in the morning. Corn does not dry in that. Corn sits in that. And a man with 90 acres standing does not wait, because there is a frost coming, and there always is. So he snaps it wet, and he throws it in the wagon, and he cribs it, and he tells himself it will dry in the crib. Sometimes it does. Here is what happens when it does not. Wet ear corn packed in a crib 8 feet through is a living thing. It breathes. It gives off heat, and the heat cannot get out through 8 feet of packed ear corn, and it drives the moisture inward, and by January the middle of that crib is warm to the hand at arm's depth. Then it molds. Then it sours. Then it is not feed any more, and a man who has cribbed 3,000 bushels of it has cribbed 3,000 bushels of nothing, and he will not know it until he digs. Verna Hoyt knew all of that on the 12th of October, 1885, standing in Milo Pruitt's yard. She had come for a different reason. Milo had sent word that his old sow was down, and she was the only person on the creek who could get a wagon jack under anything, which is the kind of errand she got in those days, and the kind she always went on. The sow was fine. She was walking back to her wagon when she stopped at the crib. The new corn was maybe 4 feet up the slats. She put her hand flat on it. "Milo," she said, "I know. You do not know or you would have it out. It will dry. Feel it," she said. He came over. He put his hand in. He was a decent man, Milo Pruitt, and not a fool, and he had been farming that bottom for 19 years. "That is just the day," he said. "It is close today. Put your arm into the elbow." He did. He stood there with his arm in his own crib for about 10 seconds, and then he took it out and did not say anything, and wiped his hand on his pants. "Crib it thin," Verna said. "Split it. 2 narrow cribs with a gap and the slats open on the west. Or run it through a mill and get the meal out where the air is at it. If you leave it 8 foot through, it will be hot in the middle by Christmas." And you would grind it. She heard it. She heard exactly what it was. And I want to say something here, because this is the moment where a different woman turns around and gets in the wagon, and honestly, she nearly did. "Milo," she said, "I would grind it, or Renner would grind it, or you can shovel it out on a barn floor and turn it with a scoop every 3rd day and never pay a soul a cent. I do not care who does it. Do not leave it in that crib." "All right." Milo said. He did not do it. Not that week. Not the next one. Not at all. He meant to. They all meant to. There was no barn floor. There was no time. There was a woman telling him, "I am not going to be hard on him." He had 2,400 bushels in that crib, and no barn floor big enough, and no time and no help. And he had a wife, and a place, and 100 other things. And the corn was warm the way corn is sometimes warm. And a woman had told him, "That last part is not nothing. I wish it were." She went to the Grange meeting on the 24th of October, 1885. She had not gone to one since March. She sat in the 3rd row again, in the green wool dress. And she waded through the road business and the fence business and a long argument about a bridge. And when Hosea Fight asked if there was anything from the floor, Verna Hoyt stood up. There were about 100 people in the hall. "There is corn cribbed wet all over this county," she said. The room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when a person everybody has an opinion about starts talking. "It came in wet, and it has not had a wind on it since the 9th of September, she said. "I have had my hand in 4 cribs this month, and every one of them is warm at arm's depth. If it goes into January 8 foot through, you will lose the middle of it." Not a little. The middle. Nobody said anything. "There are 3 things you can do, and 2 of them are free," she said. "Crib it thin, turn it on a floor. Or grind it now, this month, while it is only damp and not sour, and put the meal where the air can get at it, and feed it before spring." "And what does grinding come to?" somebody said from the back. 4 cents in town," Verna said. 1/8 at my place. I am not standing here to sell you anything. I would rather you did it in your own barn with a scoop." And then Loren Sisk said the sentence. He did not stand up to say it. He said it from his seat, to the man beside him, in that ordinary voice that carried better than shouting. "She wants the toll." That was all. That was the whole of it. 3 words in a warm room, and the room made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and Hosea Fight looked at his papers and asked if there was anything further from the floor. And there was not. Verna sat down. "Here is what I want you to sit with." She had just told 100 people the exact truth, for free with the remedy attached, and 2 of the 3 remedies did not put a cent in her pocket. And she had said so out loud, and it did not matter. It could not matter. Because for 4 years the county had known one fact about that woman, and the fact was that she took more than her share, and every sentence she ever said again would be run through that fact first, and come out the other side meaning what the fact meant. That is what a name does. It is not an insult. It is a lens. Everything goes through it first. Every word she said, every warning, every kindness, every price she ever named, it comes out the other side. It comes out meaning the name. That is what they built. Emmett Dow was at that meeting. He was standing at the back with his hat in his hand, the way he always was, and he heard every word of it, and he went home and got his book out. I know that he did, because he told her later. He had 9,000 bushels cribbed. He had cut and snapped in the second week of October, like everybody else. Because the Longspur had 1,900 head coming on to feed, and a crew to keep busy, and no more choice about weather than any other man. And he sat down with his book that night, and he wrote out what it would cost to have it turned or ground. And it came to a figure he did not like, and against it he set the following. The corn had been cribbed wet in 1881, and again in 1878, and both times it had dried out fine. 2 facts and 11 years of record against a woman's hand in a crib. He put the book away. He did not sleep well, though. He said that too. Now let me tell you about the burrs in town, because this is the other half of the machine, and by January the two halves come together and take the county's winter apart. Alva Renner was 29 years old, and he came out of Emporia, and he was genuinely a good man with an engine. He could take a portable down to the last stud and put it back and have it running by dark. He had run a shingle mill and a pump station and a threshing rig. He had never dressed a millstone in his life. That is not a slander. It is arithmetic about time. Dressing burrs is a trade you learn on your knees over years, and Alva Renner had spent his years learning steam, and steam is a fine thing to know, and it is not the same thing. And there is a trap in steam that water does not have. A water wheel gives you what the creek gives you. If you crowd the stones, the wheel slows and the miller feels it in the floor and eases off, because the creek is the boss. An engine does not slow. An engine has a governor. And it will hold speed against anything you put in front of it. And it will hold that speed while the stones run hot and close, and the meal comes out at a temperature you can feel through the sack. Hot meal looks wonderful. It is finer. It is whiter. It runs out of the spout like water, and it fills a sack beautifully. And every farmer in Chase County who took a sack off that spout in June of 1885 said the same thing, which was that they had never had meal like it. Verna Hoyt put her hand on one of those sacks on the 5th of September, 1885, in the back of Wick Schindler's wagon in front of Gedney's store. It was warm, 2 hours off the stone, and still warm through the sacking. She stood there in the street with her hand on it, and she knew the whole of what was coming, the way you know a thing you have been taught rather than a thing you have guessed. And it went through her cold. She went to the mill. That is the part people forget when they tell this story in Chase County. They tell the end of it. They do not tell you that on the 5th of September, 1885, the woman they called Greedy walked into the Chase County Milling Company on her own 2 feet and offered to fix it for nothing. Renner was under the engine with a wrench. Mr. Renner, he came out. He was pleasant. He did not know her, which was the only reason. Ma'am, my name is Verna Hoyt. I have got the watermill on Diamond Creek. Oh, Alva Renner said. That O had 4 years in it, and he had been in the county 3 months. Your meal is coming off hot, Verna said. It is coming off fine is what it is coming off. It is. It is beautiful meal. It is also warm in the sack 2 hours out, and it is going to be warm in a bin in November, and warm meal packs and sours, and a man who buys 30 bushels of it in the fall will have a bin of dough in the spring. She kept her voice level. She had practiced the whole way in on the wagon. It is the speed. You are running them close and fast, and your furrows will glaze. And once they glaze, you are grinding by rubbing instead of cutting, and it will only get hotter. Renner wiped the wrench. And what would you have me do? Open them a 16th, and drop your speed a 5th, she said, and crack them open, and let me dress them. I will do it free. I will do it tonight and be off the floor by Thursday, and you can tell the county you did it yourself. There it is. That was the offer. Alva Renner looked at her for a moment. And I do not think he was a cruel man either. And I think what he said next was the thing he had been told in a saloon by somebody who thought they were doing him a favor. "Mrs. Hoyt," he said, "I have been told about you. I expect you have. I have been told this county had 1 mill and a toll on it for 17 years, and that is done with now. That is true. And here you are wanting inside my stones." Verna Hoyt stood on that plank floor with the engine ticking as it cooled. "Yes," she said, "that is what it looks like. I know what it looks like. Then you will understand me. I do understand you." She went out past the new sign with the 2-foot letters and got up on her wagon and drove 9 miles home. And she did not tell one person about it for a year and a half. And when it did finally come out, it came out of Alva Renner's own mouth in front of a room full of people. And he was not proud of it. I said earlier that I would tell you the shameful thing, and it goes here, in November. And it is the reason I believe every word of the rest of it. Neva Cundiff came up to the mill in the 3rd week of November with a basket, the way she did, because Neva Cundiff had decided sometime in 1883 that the whole county could think what it liked. They sat in the kitchen. It got dark at 5. And Neva said something about Milo Pruitt's crib being warm and how it was a shame. And Verna Hoyt put her cup down and said this: "I want it to spoil." Neva did not answer. "I have sat in this room since October wanting it to spoil," Verna said. "Not Milo's. I do not care about Milo. I want the meal in Loren Sisk's bin to sour, and I want him to open it in February and put his hand in it, and I want to be somewhere else when he does." "Verna, I know. That is not you. It is me," she said. "That is the trouble with it. It has been me since August, and I have been going to church with it." She turned her cup around on the table. "And the worst part is not even that," Verna said. "The worst part is I know what it is going to cost this county if it goes the way I think it is going to go, and I have been sitting here doing that arithmetic for a month. And I have not once been able to make myself sorry. You want your heroes clean, I know. But a person who has been carrying 100 men for 4 years while they say a word about her at the store is not going to be clean in November. And if I told you she was, I would be telling you a nice story instead of this one. She was not clean. She was, however, going to get up in January and do a thing that nobody in Chase County would have done for her, and she was going to do it at one price. And that is the difference between what a person feels and what a person is. The first crib came open on the 19th of December, 1885. It was 9 degrees that morning, and the sky was hard and blue. Milo Pruitt went out to his crib with a scoop and 2 of his hired men to draw a load for the feedlot. They pulled the boards off the west end, and the crib breathed out at them. Steam in 9-degree air. Steam out of a crib of corn. The outside 18 inches was cold and sound. Behind that it went warm. Behind that it went hot and gray. And it had knit together into a mass a scoop would not go into. And it smelled like a brewery and a wet cellar at once. Milo Pruitt sat down on the sled and did not say anything for a while. 9 degrees. Steam off a crib. A scoop in his hand, 2 men behind him. He knew what it was. He had known in October. He had felt it himself. A woman had told him. They dug out 2,400 bushels of cribbed corn that week, and 1,500 of it was gone. Not thin, not poor. Gone. It would not feed a hog, and it would not feed a steer, and it would not keep another month. He had cribbed it on the 14th of October. She had put her hand on it on the 12th. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make this the part where the county gets what it deserved, and that is not what happened, and it is not what she wanted either. Whatever she said in her kitchen in November. What happened is that a whole county found out in about 11 days that it had a great deal less winter feed than it thought it had, and there were 26,000 head of cattle in Chase County. And it was the 22nd of December. Ora Ledbetter dug his crib on the 20th. Wick Schindler dug his on the 21st and found it sound, because he had cribbed thin. Because he always cribbed thin. Because his father had lost a crib in Illinois in 1859. The Cundiffs dug on the 22nd and lost half. Hosea Fite lost 2/3 and sat down on a bucket and cried. And I only know that because he told it on himself later, in front of people, which took a kind of courage. By Christmas of 1885, there was not a man on Diamond Creek or the Cottonwood Bottom who had not had his arm in his own corn to the shoulder. And on the 28th, Loren Sisk opened his meal bin. Now this is the other half, and it is worth going slow over. Sisk had done everything right by his own lights. He had not cribbed wet. He had ground early, in June and July and August, at the new mill, at 4 cents the bushel, no toll. And he had 900 bushels worth of good yellow meal in a plank bin in his east barn. And he had been telling people about it since September. It had packed. The top 8 inches lifted off in a crust like a loaf. Under that it was warm and dark, and it had gone sour, sharp and vinegary. And when you put a scoop in, the whole thing moved as one piece. Hot meal will do that. Every miller in Kansas knew it. It is not a mystery, and it is not a swindle. Meal that comes off the stone warm carries the heat and the moisture into the sack together, and it will not breathe out of a packed bin, and by winter you have a bin of dough. Alva Renner had ground it beautifully, fine and white and fast. It cost the county more than any toll ever taken on Diamond Creek, and here is the number, and I want it clean, because a great deal of what came after runs off it. Between the cribs and the bins, Chase County lost somewhere near 19,000 bushels of corn between the 19th of December and the middle of January. At 25 cents, that is $4,750. The steam mill had cost $3,400. They had built a mill for less than the corn they lost by not looking at a scale, and there is not a soul alive who put those two figures side by side that winter. Because people do not. Because it is not a comfortable thing to do with a pencil. Then the county did the only thing it could do. It went to town with what was left. Because there was a way out. That is the thing. Half-spoiled corn is not all spoiled corn. The stuff on the outside of every crib was sound, and the stuff just inside it was damp and warm and going, but not gone. And if you got it out and ground it now, this month, and spread the meal thin on a barn floor where the air was at it, you had feed. Wet meal turned every 3rd day will dry, and it will keep, and cattle will eat it all winter. You just had to grind it. All of it. Fast, they lined up at the Chase County Milling Company on the 4th of January, 1886. Alva Renner had 31 wagons in the street the first morning, and 40-some the second, and he fired the engine at daylight and ran until dark, and he was game. I will say that for him. He worked. He did not shirk 1 hour of it. But damp corn is not dry corn, and a stone does not care how willing you are. Damp corn does not shatter, it smears. It goes into the eye of the stone soft, and instead of being cut by the furrows, it packs into them, and the little dressing lines on the flat land fill up with a paste of meal and moisture. And the face of the stone goes smooth and shiny. That is glazing. A glazed stone does not grind. It rubs. And rubbing makes heat. And heat makes more paste, and the paste glazes it faster, and the whole thing runs away from you inside of a day. The fix is simple, and it is not quick. You stop. You take the weight off, you hoist the runner over on its bale, you scrape the faces, and you dress them, and you put it back and hang it and true it. And that is a day gone, minimum, and it will need doing again in 3 days on wet corn. Alva Renner could not do it. He did not know how. He had never laid a runner over in his life, and he had 40 wagons in the street, and every man in one of them had a barn full of cattle and had already lost half his crib. So he ran them. He opened them out a little and he ran them, and the meal got coarser and hotter and grayer. And on the 4th day it started coming out in little rolled pellets instead of meal, and on the 6th day the north stone began to squeal at about 4 in the afternoon, and on the 8th day the engine was working so hard against the drag that he broke a belt lace and lost an hour. On the 14th of January 1886, the 11th day, the Chase County Milling Company stopped. Renner shut it down himself. He did the honest thing, and he did it in public, standing on the loading dock in front of about 30 men in the cold. "They are done," he said. "I cannot grind another bushel through them until they are dressed, and I cannot dress them." "Then get somebody," said Ora Ledbetter. "There is a man in Emporia," Renner said. "I have telegraphed him twice. He is at a mill in Osage County until the 8th of February. February, that is what he says." Somebody in that crowd laughed. It was not a good laugh. It was the sound a man makes when he has just understood something and does not want to have understood it. "There is a woman 9 miles up that creek," he said. Nobody answered him. 30 men stood in the street in front of a mill that would not turn, in the middle of the worst feed winter that county had had in 15 years. And every one of them knew exactly what had been said in the Grange Hall in October, and knew who had said it, and knew what they had done with it, and not one of them went up the creek that day. Not on the 14th, not on the 15th, not one wagon, not one man. They had cattle standing in lots. They had corn going gray. They had 9 miles of road, and a word in the way. That is not cowardice. It would be easier if it were. It is something worse and more ordinary, which is that a man will hold out for 3 or 4 days against having to be wrong in front of people, even with his own cattle standing in a lot, because being wrong out loud is a debt you can never quite pay off in a small place. And he keeps thinking somebody else will go first. Somebody else went first. Emmett Dow opened his own crib on the 2nd of January. He had 9,000 bushels in 3 cribs, and he lost about 2,900 of it, and he stood there and looked at it, and then he went in the house and got the book. He was at it 2 nights again. He told her that too later, and he told it plainly, the way he told everything. He wrote out the 11 years again, what he hauled in, what he hauled home. And then he did a thing he had not done in April, because in April he had not had a reason to. He went out to the crib with a half-bushel measure and a stick and his own platform scale off the wagon shed. And he struck a bushel of his own sound corn level, and he weighed it, 45 pounds and 4 ounces. He weighed it again with a different measure and got the same thing. Then he sat on the crib sill in the cold with a bushel of his own corn on a scale in front of him, and he asked himself the question he had asked a woman in a yard on the 9th of April, 1885, standing in the sun with his hat in his hand. What has the weight got to do with the toll? And this time, with the beam sitting there in front of him, he worked it out. It took him about 4 minutes. I think it took him 4 minutes, because the man was not slow, and there was nothing in it but arithmetic. And he had been carrying the pieces of it around in a leather book for 11 years, without ever once putting them next to each other. If a bushel is a space, and the corn in it has got lighter, then a bushel is not a bushel any more. He did not haul her 2,240 bushels in 1884. He hauled her 2,240 measures of a thing that had gone light. And the meal that came home was short because the corn that went out was short, and the toll had been the same eighth it had been in 1874. And the missing 313 sacks had never been in her chest at all. They had been in his crib. in the air between his own kernels, in every wagon he had loaded for 4 years. Emmett Dow rode into Quarry Bend on the 15th of January, 1886, and stood in the street outside the shut mill for a while, and then he rode 9 miles up Diamond Creek. It was late afternoon, and it was 4 degrees, and the creek was frozen at the edges and steaming in the middle where the water came over the dam. She was in the yard splitting wood. She stopped when she heard the horse. She stood there with the axe down at her side, and her breath going up, and she watched him come the last 100 yards. And she did not say a word until he was off and standing in front of her. "Mrs. Hoyt, Miss Dow, I weighed my corn," he said. Verna Hoyt stood in her own yard in the cold and looked at him. "All right," she said. 45 pounds and 4 ounces. That is about right for the flat ground. You told me in April to bring you a wagon. I did. I did not bring it. No, there was a long piece of quiet then. The creek made the noise it makes at the dam. He turned his hat around once in his hands, which was the only nervous thing anybody ever saw Emmett Dow do. I have got 6,100 bushels out of the crib that will feed if it is ground this month, he said. There is better than 10,000 more like it in this county. The town mill is done until February, and it may be done after that. I have come to ask you what you will take to run day and night. 1/8, Verna said. That is your ordinary toll. That is my toll. There is no other mill inside 40 miles that can take it, and you know that better than I do. I do know it. Mrs. Hoyt, he said it carefully. I am telling you that this county would pay you 12 cents the bushel this month. Cash, I would pay it myself on 6,100 bushels and think I had got a bargain, and there is not a man in Chase County who would say a word against it, and a good many of them owe you the chance to say it. 1/8, she said again. Why? And here is what she said, and Neva Cundiff heard it from the kitchen door and told it for 30 years. Because in 4 years the only thing anybody in this county has ever been able to say about me is what I charge, Verna said. It has been the same number the whole time. If I move it now, then every one of them was right the whole time and just early. Emmett Dow stood there. That is a hard road, he said. It is the one that is open. Then I will ask you a second thing, and you will not like it. Ask it. Sell me a half interest in this mill, he said. $1,600. I will put in a second run of stones and a shed and a proper wagon yard, and you will run it, and I will never once tell you a thing about how. I want it because this county cannot afford to have 1 mill and 1 pair of hands, and I want it because I have got 1. 900 head and no feed, and I am done gambling on a thing I did not understand. It was, I want to say clearly, an honest offer. It was a good offer. $1,600 in Chase County in 1886 was a great deal of money, and the man meant every word of it. No, Verna said. You have not thought about it. I have thought about it since April. Mrs. Hoyt, that note of yours is due in 14 months. I know when my note is due, Mr. Dow, better than the bank does. Then tell me why not. She set the axe head down on the block. Because you would own the half of it that is not in question, she said. The stone and the water and the shed. And I would keep the half that is in question, which is the word this county has got for me. And in 5 years, there would be a good mill on Diamond Creek with your name somewhere on it, and everybody would know exactly how it came to be a good mill. And it would not be because a woman was ever right about anything. Dow did not argue. That is one of the reasons I have come to like the man. In spite of April, he did not argue. He stood there and turned it over and took it. All right, he said. You can bring your corn. When? Bring it Tuesday, she said. I need Saturday and Monday on the stones. I am not starting a run like that dull. Tuesday is the 26th. Then bring it on the 26th. He got up on the horse. He looked at the mill, and the dam, and the two worn-out stones standing on end against the wall like gravestones, and at her. "Mrs. Hoyt, I want to say a thing and I do not want an answer to it." "Then say it." "I voted for that mill in March," Emmett Dow said. "I have thought about it about 100 times since, and I could not tell you one good reason I did it, except that everybody else was putting their hand up, and I did not want to be the man standing there with his down." Then he rode off down the creek road in the dark. There was one more offer before she started, and it came on the 22nd, and it is the one that tells you the most about the county. Hosea Fite drove out with Byram Tate again. No Sisk this time. Fite had had his arm in his own corn by then, and he was not the same man he had been in August. "The Grange has voted a thing," he said, "and I am to bring it to you. Go on. There is $275 owing on your dam at the bank." He looked at Tate, and Tate looked at the floor. "The Grange will pay it. The whole of it, this week, in one piece. And what we ask against it is that you grind the county's damp corn free until the 1st of April. Free. How many bushels do you make that?" "Somewhere about 11,000, Fite said. "And you have got the money." "We raised it in 2 days," he said, "and then, because he was an honest man, we raised it in 2 days. Mrs. Hoyt, and I am aware of what that means. There is $275 in this county, whenever it is for something the county wants. There has been the whole time." Verna Hoyt stood in her kitchen with her hands on the back of a chair. "Mr. Fitty," she said, "if I take that, then in 10 years' time everything in this valley gets told one way. The county paid off the widow's note and she ground the corn. And the note is the thing everybody will remember, because a debt is a story and a stone is not. That is not fair to us." "No," she said, "it is not. And it is what will happen, and you know it will." "Then, what do you want?" 1/8, Verna said. "Off every load, from every man, the same as 1868, the same as last week, the same as Emmett Dow, the same as Loren Sisk if he comes up that road. And I will pay my own note on the 1st of March, out of what I earn, in coin, across that counter in front of Mr. Tate here, and there will not be one thing about it for anybody to tell." Byram Tate said quietly, "It is 11,000 bushels. Mrs. Hoyt at 1/8, that is a good deal more than $275. "I know what it is," she said. "It is the first honest year I have been allowed to have." They went home. She dressed both stones on the 23rd and the 24th of January, 1886, on her knees, alone, in a building where the water in the bucket froze at the edges overnight. And on Tuesday the 26th, at 10 minutes past 6 in the morning, in the dark, at 11 below, there were 14 wagons standing on Diamond Creek Road with their teams blanketed. And the first one in line was the Longspurs. And Emmett Dow was sitting up on it himself. She came out with a lantern at 20 past 6 and opened the sluice gate. The wheel had not turned in 9 days, and it took the water a minute to find it. Then the whole building woke up. The shaft turned. And the pit wheel took hold, and the stone nut caught, and up on the floor the runner came round, and the sound came up through the boards into the souls of every man standing in that yard. 14 wagons. Some of them had been there since 4. Verna Hoyt put the lantern on the post and looked down the line. "I will say this once so nobody has to ask," she said. "It is 1/8, weighed off the meal, and I will read every beam out loud. 2 men at a time in the door. If your corn will not feed, I will tell you so, and you will take it home again, and I will not charge you for the ride." Nobody said anything. "And I am not grinding sour," she said. "Damp, yes warm, yes sour no. Sour meal will take a bin down with it, and I am not putting it in a sack with my hands." Emmett Dow got down off the first wagon. "How do you want it, Mrs. Hoyt? Back it to the door and stand out of my way." That is how the run started, and it went on for 21 days. Let me tell you what 21 days of that is. Because it is easy to say, and it was not easy to do, and every bit of it was done by one woman and 2 borrowed men who were not allowed to touch the important part. The mill ran from first light until she could not see, and then it ran on lamps. On the long days it went 18 hours. The 2 Longspur hands, Rule Kennedy and Ephraim Bowles, sacked and loaded and kept the yard moving and fed the horses. Dow left them there on the first morning and did not ask, but nobody touched the stones but her. Here is why, and it is the whole of the trade. Every load coming up that road was different. Some of it was sound and dry off the outside of a crib. Some of it was 20% moisture and warm out of the middle. Some of it had the germs starting to go and had to be run coarse and got out into the air inside of an hour. A stone set for the first is wrong for the second and will ruin the third. So she set them by hand, load by load, all day on the tentering screw. Up a hair, down a hair. Feel the meal in the palm, close the hand, open it. If it balls, she is running too close or the corn is too wet. If it powders, she can come down. Nobody else in Chase County could do that. Not one person. It is not strength, and it is not cleverness. It is 30 years of having your hand in meal. And every 40 hours, whatever else was happening, she stopped and dressed the stones. You could not skip it on that corn. The damp packs the furrows. She had watched a man in town try to skip it and put a mill out of business in 11 days. So at midnight or 2 in the afternoon, or whenever the 40 hours came round, she shut the gate. And the wheels stopped, and the yard groaned, and Verna Hoyt threw the bale over the runner stone and got the crane on it and laid it over on its face-up bed. That stone weighed about 1,300 pounds. The crane and the screw do the lifting. That is true, and any miller will tell you so. What the crane does not do is turn it, or set it, or take the swing out of it as it comes over, or square it down on the bed without letting it drop the last inch and chip a face. That is done by a person with their shoulder and hip against 1,300 pounds of quartz, walking it round, taking the weight on their own frame and feeding it out slow. Her father had taught her at 14 that she had the build for it. The county had spent 4 years making a joke out of exactly the thing that was now standing between it and a spring with no feed in it. And there were men in that yard who watched her lay a runner stone over on the 28th of January and did not say one word for the rest of the day. Then she knelt down and dressed it. 2 hours, 3, on her knees on the cold floor with a mill pick, going over the furrows and recutting the fine lines on the flats, tapping and tapping, and the steel throwing off little bright splinters that go into the backs of your hands and stay there. That is where the old saying comes from about a miller showing his mettle. She had them from her wrists to her knuckles, blue-black under the skin, hundreds of them, some of them 20 years old. She dressed a stone 11 times in those 21 days. 11 times. On her knees, on a cold floor, alone, with a yard full of wagons waiting. 2 hours, sometimes 3. Then hang it. Then true it. Then open the gate again. Now let me put you out on that road, because the road is the part I would want to have seen. Diamond Creek Road runs down off the limestone and along the water, and it is not wide. By the 3rd day there were wagons on it from before daylight. By the first week the line was better than a mile some mornings, and men were building fires at the head of it and standing around them. And people came out to look. They came from Quarry Bend, and from the Cottonwood Bottom, and from as far as Halloran. 40 people a day, some days more, standing along the rail fence above the mill in the cold, with nothing to do there at all, watching a stone building with a wheel going. I have thought about why for a long time. I think it is this. A county that has been wrong about something for 4 years does not get to find that out in one piece. It finds it out in the back of a wagon at 6 in the morning, one man at a time, when a woman calls out the weight of your own corn. And it is not what you thought it was. And you have to stand there with your hat on and hear it. She read the beam out loud. Every single load. 21 days. Bushel weight 45 1/4. Mr. Ledbetter. Bushel weight 44 even. Mr. Schindler. That is your East Field. 47 1/2. Mrs. Cundiff. That is the best corn I have had in this door since 1879. Nobody had to be told what she was doing. Nobody said a word about it either. It went up that road and down it in about 4 days. And by the second week, the men in the line were saying the number to each other before they got to the door, guessing at it, arguing about it. And there were 2 or 3 of them who started bringing a measure and a stick along in the wagon. She never once said, "I told you." Rule Kennedy, who was there for the whole 21 days and who had no reason to make anything up, was asked about that in his old age and said she never mentioned it. Not to Milo Pruitt. Not to Hosea Fight when he came up with 300 bushels on the 30th and could not look at her. Not once. She said the number, and she took her 1/8, and she said, "Bring the next one." That was the other thing she said. All day, for 3 weeks, bring the next one. Back it to the door, strike it level, read the beam, say it out loud, grind it, weigh the meal, take the 1/8, sack it, load it, bring the next one. Some of them came at night. I want to tell you about that, because it is the smallest thing in this whole story, and it is the one that says the most. The mill ran on lamps after dark. 2 lanterns on posts in the yard, one over the hopper, one at the door. And from about the 4th day on there were men who timed their arrival for after 9 o'clock. Not because of the line. The line was gone by then. Because nobody was watching. Ora Ledbetter came at 2 in the morning on the 30th of January. 2 in the morning. In January. He had driven from the far side of the cottonwood in the dark with 90 bushels because he could not make himself do it at 10 in the morning with 40 people on the fence. She heard the wagon. She came out with the lantern. Mr. Ledbetter, Mrs. Hoyt, back it to the door. He backed it to the door. She weighed it. She read the beam out loud at 2 in the morning to one man and a horse. Bushel weight 44 1/2. Ora Ledbetter stood there in the cold. "My wife said a thing about you at the store," he said, "about 4 years back. You were at the flour barrel. I remember it. I have thought about that." Verna Hoyt tied off the sack. "Mr. Ledbetter," she said, "I have got 90 bushels of yours to run, and I have got 400 more coming at daylight. If you want to talk about your wife, you will have to do it while I work. That is fair." "It is not fair," she said. "It is only what there is time for." She ground his corn. He helped load it, which he did not have to do. He got up on the wagon at about 4. "You could have raised your price," he said, "this month. Any of us would have paid it." "I know. Why did you not?" And she said the thing that Rule Kennedy heard from the loft and never forgot. "Because you would have been comfortable," Verna said. "If I take 12 cents off you tonight, you get to drive home thinking they were right about her all along, and you would sleep. I am not giving anybody in this county a way to sleep." He drove off in the dark. There were 11 of them that came after 9 o'clock in those 21 days. Rule Kennedy counted. She never said a word about it to any of them, and she never told anybody afterward which 11, and she took the same 1/8 in the dark that she took at noon. Milo Pruitt did the opposite. Milo came in daylight on the 27th, the 2nd day, with what he had left, and he stood at the fire at the head of the line with about 20 men, and he said it out loud, unasked. "She had her hand in my crib on the 12th of October, Milo Pruitt said. Nobody answered him. "She told me to split it or grind it or turn it on a floor. She said she did not care who did it. I did not do any of it. Milo, somebody said. I am going to say it here, he said, because I am not going to say it to her, and I want you all to know why. If I go up to that door and tell her I am sorry, then she has got to stand there and be gracious to me, and she has got 300 bushels behind me in this line. He shut up after that. He came up in his turn and she weighed his corn and read the beam, and neither of them mentioned October, and he hauled it home. The women started coming in the second week. Dosha Pruitt was the first. She came up on the third with a covered basket and did not knock and did not make a speech. She put a pot of beans on the millhouse stove and left. On the fourth, she came back with bread. By the sixth, there were 4 of them. By the 9th, there was a kind of arrangement nobody had ever discussed, where somebody had a pot on that stove every day, and the 2 Longspur hands ate out of it, and Verna ate out of it standing up with a spoon. Neva Cundiff said later that not one of those women ever apologized either. They just cooked. That is how it is done out here, Neva said. A woman does not say she was wrong. She turns up with a pot. There is a harder scene, and I am not going to leave it out. On the 5th of February, a man named Cleve Attaway came up from the south end of the county with 200 bushels. He had lost the whole middle of his crib. What he had left was the ring around the outside and about a foot in from it, and the foot in from it was gone. Sour, sharp in the nose from 10 feet away, she stood in the wagon and put her arm down into it and pulled up a handful and smelled it and let it fall. I cannot grind this, she said. You have got to. Mr. Attaway, I have got 140 head and I have got that. He was 50-some, and he had a voice like a man in a church. Do not tell me what you cannot do. Take your eighth and grind it. If I put that in a sack, Verna said, it will take down whatever bin you put it in. All of it. Whatever sound meal you have got left will be dough by April. You will not lose 140 head this week. You will lose them in March, and you will not know why. Then take it and grind it, and let me lose it my own way. She got down out of the wagon. There were maybe 30 people in that yard. He was crying by then, and he was a proud man, and everybody was looking at the ground. Cleve, she said. It was the only time in 21 days she called a man by his first name in that yard. Take the top 18 inches off the outside ring. That is sound. That is maybe 60 bushels. Bring me that, and I will grind it, and I will not take a toll off it. You said one price. I said one price on corn, she said. That is not corn any more. There is no price on it. He hauled it home. He came back on the 7th with 58 bushels off the outside ring, and she ground it and took nothing, and she never once mentioned it. And Cleve Attaway told that story in the south end of Chase County until 1911. She turned away 1,600 bushels in those 3 weeks. 11 men, every one of them in her own doorway, to their faces, with people listening. That is the part I would have found hardest. Anybody can be generous when it is grinding. Standing in a door and telling a man with 140 head that the thing in his wagon is not feed, in February, in front of his neighbors, and being right about it, and not softening it, there is a kind of nerve in that which has nothing at all to do with lifting stones. On the 2nd of February, it went to 15 below. The creek froze hard along both banks, and the ice began building on the wheel. That is a real danger, and not a small one. Water splashes off the buckets and freezes on the rim and on the spokes, and a wheel puts on ice the way a boat puts on ice, and it goes out of balance, and a 16-foot wheel out of balance will tear its own shaft out of the bearings. You cannot let it build. So she got up at 3 in the morning on the 3rd of February and went out with a lantern and a maul and a long pole and went down onto the ice apron below the dam and knocked it off. She did that at 3 in the morning for 6 nights running. Ephraim Bowles offered on the first night. She would not let him. Not out of pride, or not only. She said it plain. A man who has not been on that apron before does not know where the ice is thin at the tail race, and she had been going down there since she was 9 years old. And she was not going to spend her one asset in the county on somebody else's leg. Emmett Dow found out about it on the 4th. He came up that afternoon, and he had $200 in his coat. "I want to put this in your hand," he said, "and I do not want it called a gift. Call it a bonus on tonnage. Call it whatever you want to call it." No, Mrs. Hoyt, Mr. Dow. She had been up since 3 and had ground 460 bushels, and she had a hand wrapped in a rag. "If you put $200 in my hand today, then on the 1st of March when I go into that bank and pay my note, there will be a man in Chase County who knows I did it with your money. And in a year he will not remember the $200. He will only remember that Dow paid it." Nobody would say that. "Everybody would say that," she said. "They have been saying a thing about me for 4 years, and none of it was even true. Think what they could do with a thing that was." He put the money back. "Then tell me what I can do." "You can go home and get the rest of your corn out of that crib," she said, "and you can send it up here in the order you promised and not jump the line, and when it is over you can tell people the truth about April, if you have got the stomach for it." "I have got the stomach for it." "We will see," Verna said, and went back inside. That was the 4th time somebody tried to lift the weight off her. And the 4th time she would not have it, and by then even the men in the yard had started to understand what they were watching. It was not stubbornness. She had exactly one thing to sell in that county that was worth anything, and it was not meal. It was the right to have been correct on her own. On the 6th of February, Alva Renner drove out. He came up the road on foot from where he had left the rig, which people noticed. And he stood at the fence with the rest of them for better than an hour before he came down to the door. She saw him. She kept working. At about 4 o'clock she shut the gate to dress, and the yard groaned the way it always did, and Alva Renner came down and took his hat off in the doorway. "Mrs. Hoyt, Mr. Renner, I have come to ask you to teach me to dress a stone." The mill was quiet. There were maybe 25 people close enough to hear it, and every one of them heard it. Verna Hoyt looked at him for a while. "It takes about 4 years," she said. "Then I will start today." "Why?" "Because I put 900 bushels of hot meal in Loren Sisk's bin," Renner said. "And I put maybe 600 more of it in bins all over this county, and I did it in June, and I was proud of it, and I have had 4 men in my mill this month tell me what it turned into." He turned the hat around. "And because you came to me in September and told me the whole of it and offered to fix it for nothing, and I sent you off, and I have not said that out loud to a soul until right now. 25 people at the fence. Nobody made a sound." "Get an apron," Verna said. "You will be on your knees until dark, and you will not be any good at it." He was on his knees until dark. He was not any good at it. He came back on the 9th and the 12th and the 16th, and every week after that until the fall. And Alva Renner ended up a fair stone dresser. And he told that story in Chase County for 40 years, and never once told it with himself coming out well. Loren Sisk came up Diamond Creek Road on the 11th of February, 1886. He came late in the day with 2 wagons and a hired man, and there were about 30 people around when he pulled in, and the yard got very quiet. She was in the door with the beam scale. He got down. He did not say anything at first. He stood there in his good coat in the cold with his hands behind his back, exactly the way he had stood in the yard in October of 1881. And I do not know whether he thought about that. And I would like to. "I have got 640 bushels," he said. "Back it to the door. Mrs. Hoyt, I want to know your figure before I unload." "It is 1/8, Verna said. "It has been 1/8 since 1868. You have known that longer than I have." He looked at her. "That is all?" That is all. There is not a man here would blame you for asking me double. There is not a man here who would ever let me forget it either, she said. Back it to the door. They backed it to the door. She waited herself, and the yard stood there and listened. And she called it out the way she called out every load, flat, with no more weight on it than any other. Bushel weight 43.5. Mr. Sisk 43.5. The lowest number she read out in 21 days. And it came off the flat bottom ground east of Quarry Bend, off the biggest corn crop in Chase County, out of the crib of the man who had stood up in a hall in March of 1885 next to a half-bushel measure that said 44 pounds and used it to prove that a woman was a thief. She did not say one word about it. She did not have to. There were 30 people in that yard, and every one of them had been at that meeting or had heard about it from somebody who was. And the number went down Diamond Creek Road and into Quarry Bend before Sisk's own wagons got home. He never apologized. I want to be straight about that, because a story where the hard man breaks down and weeps is a nice story, and it is not this one. Loren Sisk lived another 19 years in that county, and he never said a word to her about October of 1881 or March of 1885. What he did do was pay his eighth and haul his meal and come back on the 14th with the rest of it. And from that winter until he died he ground at Diamond Creek, and he never once ground anywhere else. Some men can only apologize with a wagon. There was one more thing in that yard that I have to tell you about, and it happened on the 8th, and it is small. A teamster came over from Morris County with a load for somebody, a man nobody knew, and he was standing at the fire at the head of the line complaining about the weight, and he said it. He said, "Well, this is the greedy one, is it?" He had heard it somewhere. It had traveled that far. That is how good a word it was. And Wick Schindler, who had lost nothing that winter because he cribbed thin, and who had never in 4 years said one thing in her defense, turned around and said, "You will want to shut your mouth." That was all. Nobody made a speech. The teamster shut his mouth. But I think that is the exact hour the word died in Chase County. Not in March, in front of 200 people, with wagons and a scale. In a fire at the head of a line of wagons on the 8th of February, when a quiet man who had been wrong for 4 years decided he was not going to be wrong for a 5th one, out loud, in front of 11 people who did not matter. That is usually where words die. Nobody is ever watching. She shut the gate for the last time on the 15th of February, 1886, at about 4:20 in the afternoon. The last load was Neva Cundiff's, which Verna arranged on purpose and never admitted to arranging. Rule Kennedy kept the tally book, because she would not spare the time, and the tally book is the reason we have the number at all. In 21 days, the Diamond Creek mill took in and ground 9,400 bushels of the county's damp corn. 9,400 bushels, 1 pair of 4-foot burrs, 1 wheel, 1 woman, dressing the stones 11 times and setting them by hand 100 times a day. The Chase County Milling Company, with a 12-horse engine and $640 worth of French burrs, and a man working as hard as he knew how, had done 3,100 bushels in 11 days and then stopped for 4 weeks. That is not a slander on Alva Renner, and he would be the first to tell you so. It is what a trade is worth. She turned 1,600 bushels away. Sour, past feeding, gone. She told every one of those men to their faces, in her own doorway, in front of whoever was standing there, and every one of them believed her. And that is a thing that would not have been true in October. She took at 1/8 the honest legal toll of the state of Kansas, 1,175 bushels of meal. She sold most of it that spring at 47 cents, and on the evening of the 15th of February, she came out and sat down on the mill step in her apron, with her hands hanging between her knees. And Neva Cundiff came and sat next to her. And neither of them said anything for about 10 minutes. Then Verna Hoyt said, I cannot open my left hand. I know it. I have not been able to since Thursday. I know, Neva said. Everybody knows. There have been 40 people a day watching you not open it. Here is what 21 days bought. Chase County went into that winter with something near 19,000 bushels of corn already lost. It should have lost twice that. The meal that came off Diamond Creek in those 3 weeks went out onto barn floors and granary floors and haymow floors all over that end of the county, spread 4 inches deep, turned with a scoop every 3rd day. And it dried, and it kept, and it fed 26,000 head of cattle through to grass. There was no dye up in Chase County in the spring of 1886. There was one in 3 counties west of it. Not a bad one. Bad enough that people talked about it for years, and bad enough that everybody in Chase County knew, in the specific way a county knows a thing it does not say out loud, exactly how close it had come, and exactly what had stood between. Verna Hoyt could not open her left hand for 11 days. She soaked it in hot water and salt twice a day, and Neva Cundiff came up and worked it for her, finger by finger. And it came back most of the way by the end of the month. It never came back all the way. She dressed stone for another 26 years with a left hand that would not quite make a fist. And if you had asked her, she would have told you it was a fair trade, and then changed the subject. She did not grind at all between the 15th and the 27th of February. She slept. She wrote up the daybook. She went down and looked at the dam. On the 1st of March 1886, she drove into Quarry Bend. It was a Monday, and it was bright, and the mud was coming up. She went into the bank, and she stood at the counter, and she asked Byram Tate for the note on the Diamond Creek Dam. Tate got it out of the drawer. She had it in a flour sack, not a pocketbook, not an envelope. A flour sack, because that is what she had, and she set it on the counter and untied it and counted it out in front of him. $275, most of it in silver, some of it in gold. All of it counted out one piece at a time onto a bank counter in a small town on a Monday morning in March, with Byram Tate watching, and Hosea Fight at the desk by the window pretending not to. And 3 other people in that bank who all stopped what they were doing. It took a while. That is a lot of coin. Tate wrote across the face of the note and signed it and blotted it and handed it to her. "Mrs. Hoyt," he said, "I want to say something. You do not have to. I would like to." "Then say it here," Verna said, "in the bank, in front of these people, or do not say it at all. I am done with things said out at my place where nobody hears them." Byram Tate went red. He was 58 years old, and he had held paper on half that county, and he stood there and took it. "In August I came out to your place with a proposition," he said, loudly enough. It was meant kindly, and it was not kind. "I told you the bank would look favorably on you if you gave up the mill. That was the bank talking, and I was the bank. And I am sorry for it, and there is your note, paid in full and no man's money in it but your own." "Thank you," she said. She folded the note twice and put it inside her dress against her ribs and drove home. That was the 1st of March. Now let me tell you about the 5th, because on the 5th of March, 1886, Chase County did something it had never done before and never did again, and people who were 6 years old that day were still telling it in 1950. The Chase County Milling Company reopened that morning. The man from Emporia had come on the 20th of February and dressed the burrs and gone away again, and Alva Renner had watched every hour of it with an apron on, and the engine had steam up by 7:30. There was a new sign painted on the same gable end, now 3 cents the bushel. They had cut the price. Of course they had. There was a spring's worth of grinding to be had in that county, and every man in it had somewhere between 20 and 400 bushels left to run, and 3 cents the bushel cash, against a toll of 1/8, is not a close question on paper. It is not even an argument. Renner opened the doors at 8. Nobody came. Now go back 3 days, to the last week of February, and put yourself on a horse with Emmett Dow, because this is the part that took the work. He rode for 6 days. He did not send word, and he did not write letters, and he did not stand up in a hall. He rode. He went to the Cundiffs and the Pruitts and the Ledbetters, and up onto the flat ground and out along the Cottonwood, and over the county line into the edge of Morris. And he sat on a horse in 41 yards and asked one question. And he asked it the same way every time. The question was this: where are you grinding this spring? That was all. He did not argue. And he did not shame anybody. And he did not make a speech, and Reuel Kennedy, who rode with him 4 of the 6 days, said Dow never once mentioned the word or the meeting or the toll. Some men said town, because of the 3 cents. He said, all right, and thanked them, and rode on. 22 of them said Diamond Creek. And then Emmett Dow asked his second question, which was the one he had ridden 6 days to ask. And it went like this: then will you haul it on the 5th, in the morning, with me? That is the whole of the thing he did. There is no more to it than that. He did not pay anybody, and he did not promise anybody anything, and what he was asking for was not corn, and everybody he asked knew it. He was asking them to be seen. They gathered at the Longspur Gate before daylight on the 5th of March, 1886. The Longspur had 22 wagons of its own out that morning, loaded, 4-horse and 6-horse teams, with Dow up on the lead one himself. The Cundiffs brought 3. The Pruitts brought 4, and Milo Pruitt had scraped the bottom of a ruined crib to fill them, and everybody knew it, and nobody said a word about it. Wick Schindler came with 2. Hosea Fite came with 5, which was every wagon and every borrowed wagon he could put a horse in front of. Alva Renner did not come, because Alva Renner had a mill to open at 8 o'clock, and he was not that kind of a fool, and what he did instead was better. By 6:15, there were 60 wagons standing in the road outside the Longspur Gate in the dark. 60. Loaded. Teams blanketed and stamping, and the drivers walking up and down the line with lanterns. And it stretched better than 1.25 miles down the road, and Reuel Kennedy said afterward that when the light came up over the breaks, and you could finally see the far end of it, 2 or 3 men took their hats off. And one of them said, "My God." And that was all anybody said. They started at sunup. The Quarry Bend road comes down off the flat ground and into town from the northeast, and it runs the length of the main street, past the lumber yard, past Gedney's store, past the bank, and out the other side. 60 loaded wagons take a long time to go down a street. The town came out. All of it. They came out of the store and the bank and the harness shop, and they stood on the boardwalk in the cold with their arms folded, and they watched, and by the time the middle of that line was going past the bank there, were people who had walked in from a mile out to see it. At the corner of the lumber yard, the Chase County Milling Company had its doors open, and its stack smoking, and 3 cents the bushel painted 2 feet high on the gable end. 60 wagons went past it. Not one turned in. Not the Longspur, not the Cundiffs, not the Pruitts, not Wick Schindler, not Hosea Fite, not one of the 60. The doors stood open. The stack kept smoking. Nobody stopped. And Alva Renner came out and stood on his own loading dock in his apron with his hat in his hand, and stood there for the better part of an hour while they went by, and did not put it back on. That is the thing he did instead of coming, and if you ask me, it took more. They went out the far end of town and past the Halloran Road, where a man could have turned south and been at another mill in 2 hours, and nobody turned. Then they came to the Creek Road and went up it in single file for 9 miles, along the water, up onto the limestone and back down again, and the last wagon in the line did not reach the mill yard until afternoon. Verna Hoyt heard them before she saw them. She had been up since 4. She had dressed both stones on the 3rd and the 4th, because Dow had sent Kennedy over on the 2nd with exactly 7 words, which were, "Have them sharp on Friday morning, ma'am." She had not known what it meant. She had assumed it meant the long spur. She came out into the yard at about 9 o'clock with her apron on and her sleeves rolled. And there were 40-odd wagons already in the yard and along the fence, and backed up the road out of sight around the bend. And there were people on foot standing on the rail fence. And there were more coming. She stood in her own doorway and did not move. Emmett Dow got down off the lead wagon. He did not go to her. He went to the back of his wagon, and he took out 3 things and carried them into the middle of that yard where everybody could see, and he set them down on the ground, and I want to name them for you one at a time. A half-bushel measure. Not his own, the county's sealed standard measure, the legal one, with the county seal burned into the side of it, which he had gone to the courthouse and signed out on the 4th of March in front of the register. A stick, and a sack of his own corn out of the sound end of his own crib. Then he looked at Verna Hoyt. "Mrs. Hoyt," he said, "will you lend me the use of your platform scale?" Verna Hoyt stood in her doorway. "It is in the door where it has always been," she said. They carried the scale out into the yard, 200 people. I have seen it put at 180, and I have seen it put at 250, and I do not know the number, and neither did anybody there, and it does not matter. Call it 200 people standing in a mill yard on Diamond Creek on the 5th of March, 1886. Emmett Dow filled the county's measure out of his own sack. He struck it level with the stick. He did it slowly, and he did it twice, and he held the stick up afterwards so the people at the back could see there was nothing in his hand. He put it on the platform. Then he stepped back and said, "Somebody else read it. I do not want it read by me." Milo Pruitt came out of the crowd and read it. 45 pounds, Milo said. And a quarter. Say it again. 45 and a quarter. What does the law say a bushel of corn weighs in the state of Kansas? 56. Say that again, too. 56 pounds, Milo Pruitt said. And Emmett Dow turned around in the middle of that yard and talked to 200 people for about 4 minutes, and Reuel Kennedy wrote down what he could remember of it that night. And this is the shape of it. "On the 9th of April last year, I rode up this road with a paper in my coat," he said. "I had 11 years of what I hauled into this mill and what I hauled home out of it. I had it right. Every figure on it was right. And I stood in that yard, and I told this woman I was taking the Longspurs grinding to town, and she asked me to bring her 1 wagon of my own corn and put it on that scale, and I would not do it. Nobody in that yard made a sound. I would not do it, because I did not want to have to change my mind," he said. "I want that said out loud, because I have heard a great many reasons given in this county in the last 5 years, and that was mine." He pointed at the beam. "There is the whole of it. A bushel is not a weight. A bushel is a box. 56 pounds of corn used to fill that box, and now 45 does, and every bushel I hauled up this creek for 4 years was short before I ever got here. And the toll never moved. It was 1/8 in 1868, and it was 1/8 this February when this county came up here with everything it had left." Then he said the sentence that finished it. "We did not lose that corn to a toll," Emmett Dow said. "We lost it to not one of us being willing to walk 9 miles and look at a scale, because of who was standing next to it. I have thought about that sentence for a long time. It is not an apology. He never did apologize, exactly, and neither did the county. What it is arithmetic said out loud by a man they would believe, 4.5 years late, in front of everybody, which is precisely and exactly what she had been unable to buy with anything she owned. Then he took his hat off. "Mrs. Hoyt," he said, "there are 60 wagons in your road and on the county road behind it, and there is not one of us going to town this spring. I am asking you in front of all of them. What is your toll?" And here it is. This is the moment, and it is not the wagons, whatever people remember. Because for 4 years and 5 months, Verna Hoyt had not said her own price out loud to a crowd. She had said it in her doorway, one man at a time, flat, like a woman reading a beam. She had gone on taking less than the law allowed her out of every load in the county, and had never once let it be seen. She had refused $40 a month, and $1,600, and $275 paid off in one piece, and $200 in a coat pocket, and 12 cents the bushel when she had them over a barrel, and everybody knew it. She had made herself unaccusable for 4 years, and it had not worked, because it was never a price they were accusing her of. So she came down off the step into her own yard, in her apron, in front of 200 people, and she said it. "1/8?" she said. "Louder, ma'am." "1/8," Verna Hoyt said. "The same as my father, the same as the state of Kansas allows, the same as it was in 1868, and the same as it was on the 26th of January, and I will take it off the meal and not off the measure, and I will read every beam out loud, and that is what it costs to grind at Diamond Creek." And 60 wagons unloaded. It took 4 days. She ground for 11 weeks that spring, and she ground 14,000 bushels of it. And the Chase County Milling Company ground the rest, and did well enough, because a county that size had worked for 2 mills once it stopped needing one of them to be a punishment. There is a piece of county business at the end of this, and it is small and dry, and I love it. On the 20th of March, 1886, at the Grange meeting in Quarry Bend, Hosea Fite brought a motion. The motion was that the county's sealed standard half-bushel measure, which had lived in a cupboard at the courthouse since 1872, and had been brought out exactly twice in 14 years, should be kept from then on at the Diamond Creek Mill, in the miller's charge, where there was a platform scale and a person who would use it. It carried 96-4. Understand what that is. It is not a gift, and it is not a thank you, and there is no money in it. It is a duty. The county put its standard of measure in that woman's building and made her keep it, which meant that from March of 1886 onward, if any man in Chase County wanted to know what a bushel of his own corn weighed, he had to go up Diamond Creek Road and ask her. They did too, all that spring, and the spring after that. Loren Sisk was one of the 96. He never said anything about it. He voted, and he ground his corn at Diamond Creek every year until he died in 1904. And he paid his eighth, and once, in 1891, when a new family from Ohio said something at the store about the mill's toll being steep, Loren Sisk said, "Go up there and weigh a bushel first," and went back to his coffee. That is as close as that man ever came, and I have decided it counts. Now the last thing, and it happened with nobody watching, which is right. Emmett Dow stayed behind on the 5th after the wagons had gone. He helped carry the platform scale back inside, and he set the county's measure on the shelf above the flour chest, next to the daybook, because that is where she told him to put it. He looked at the book. "How long?" he said. "How long what? How long have you been taking it off the meal instead of the measure?" Verna Hoyt stood there with her hand on the shelf. "January of 1882, she said. Emmett Dow did not say anything for a while. He was a man with a book of his own. and he could do the arithmetic as fast as anybody alive, and I am certain he did it standing right there, roughly in his head, the way you do. That is 4 years, he said. It is. Off every load in this county. Off every load in this county. Mrs. Hoyt, his voice was not steady, and Emmett Dow's voice was always steady. What does that come to? I am not going to tell you, she said. I would like to know it. I know you would. Why not? Because you would tell somebody, Verna said, because you would think it was owed to me. And then it would be the story. And in 20 years there would not be a soul in Chase County who remembered anything about this mill, except that we all owed the widow money, and they would hate me for it, and they would be right to. That is not right. It is not right, she said. It is true. Put the measure on the shelf. He put the measure on the shelf. I will tell you, though, because she is not here to stop me, and because she wrote it down herself in a ruled daybook that stayed in that mill until 1934. 6,320 pounds of cornmeal, $1,104, 4 times the note that nearly took her mill. Given away a few pounds at a time, over 4 years, to men who were saying a word about her at the store while she did it, and not one living person in Chase County ever knew. And she went to her grave in 1919, without ever saying the sentence she wrote under that number on an August night in 1885 at a kitchen table with a lamp going down. I have been carrying you. Emmett Dow came up Diamond Creek Road on a Sunday in the middle of April 1886 with an empty wagon. That was the first time in 11 years. He had been coming up that road since 1875, and there had been corn in the wagon every single time. And on that Sunday there was nothing in it at all, and he had a clean shirt on. And he stopped at the gate instead of driving into the yard, which is a thing a man does when he is not there on business and wants you to know it before he opens his mouth. Verna Hoyt was in the doorway. She looked at the empty wagon for a while. Then she went in and put the coffee on, and left the door standing open behind her. And that is where I am going to leave the two of them, because the rest of it belonged to them, and not to Chase County, and not to me. The mill ran until 1912. She took an apprentice in 1889, a girl of 15 from a place on the Cottonwood whose father could not feed her, and that girl dressed stone in 4 counties for 30 years and taught 2 more. Alva Renner ran the steam mill in Quarry Bend until 1907 and came out to Diamond Creek every spring. And when he was an old man in Emporia and somebody asked him who taught him his trade, he said a woman on a creek in Chase County. And if they laughed, he would sit there and wait until they were done laughing. The county's sealed measure stayed on that shelf for 26 years. And the word went away. Not all at once. Words do not. It was in the county in 1886, and it was mostly gone by 1888, and by 1892 there were young married men in Quarry Bend who had never heard it at all, and the ones who had did not repeat it, because repeating it would have required explaining it, and there was no way to explain it that did not end with a scale. That is what actually kills a name, not a speech, not 60 wagons even. It is that one day the story stops being tellable without the part that makes the teller look small. Loren Sisk said 7 words in a mill yard in October of 1881, and they cost that county more than any tax it ever paid. He said, "You can see where the toll went." He was pointing at the wrong thing. The toll had not gone anywhere. It had been the same eighth for 18 years, and for 4 of those years it had been less than an eighth. And where it had actually gone was into the air between the kernels of the county's own light corn, in the county's own wagons, on the way up the county's own road. And every man who ever repeated those 7 words was hauling the answer with him while he said them. They spent 4 years counting a woman's hands. Not one of them ever weighed the corn. It was in every wagon. the whole time, up the road and back, in their own cribs, in their own hands. Nobody looked. Nobody had to be clever. Somebody had to be willing. And when this county was finally in trouble deep enough that it had to send for the one person it had spent 5 years making a joke out of, she did not raise her price by a cent, and she did not make a single one of them say they were sorry, and she ground 9,400 bushels in 21 days with a hand that never worked right again. The woman they called Greedy was the only person in Chase County who had ever given anything away.